There we
Are
go.
you recording directly in Zoom, or do you record with an external?
We are live to YouTube. I'm kidding.
Where's the audience? All the other nerds care.
Yeah, true.
The community in Austria is quite small, so I think my mom will watch because I'm in it, and that's it.
Okay. So
anyway, do we have a plan for today? I
don't think so.
Okay.
I think we have
there's a rough concept.
Yeah, a really rough
I'm
concept. So I'm Brian, as you've already mentioned in German, probably. And I'm the creator of PIDtoolbox, which is a big graphical tool for analyzing data from our little drones.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
I'm Michael, call sign is Navigator. I'm also a club chairman of a club for remote pilots, basically for the commercial part. And I'm a confessing drone nerd. This. I would call myself some sort of drone expert in expertise for especially drone law. I used to call myself expert in PID tuning, but since I met Brian and Chris and all the other guys, I would like to just say drone nerd.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, I'm also one of the clubmen of one of the Vienna FPV clubs called Vienna FPV, which kind of makes sense. I like to fly. I don't fly a lot, and I don't care about tuning. So we have basically the whole spectrum of people tuning the shit out of their copters, and me not caring about them and flying default settings all day long. Brian, convince me. Why should I change?
That's a good question. I don't think you have to change at all.
Okay. Well, thanks for the talk. It was a nice evening.
It was a nice evening. Nice knowing you. Bye. A couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I was just starting to get into analyzing data in Black Box Explorer. Probably before that. But what I started to do was export the log file into like a readable CSV file. So I don't know if you know, but in Black Box Explorer, you can export the data file so that you can actually open it up as an Excel spreadsheet or something, you know. And so it was the first time I realized that I could actually get into this data myself and start to do my own analysis. So I started communicating back and forth with Mark Spatz, UAV Tech, for a little bit, and at some point he kind of lit a fire under my ass, I suppose, so to speak, to go for it and build something larger. And
how long have you been flying at that point in time? So were you already kind of an expert, or just starting?
I guess I picked up my first drone, which was a beast, back in 2013, and got into mini quads maybe 2016, 2015. But what I started to really want to understand is where in the frequency spectrum these kind of oscillations we get while just cruising are coming from. That was really one of the main things, actually, because really, what really bugged me about mini quads was, you'd work so hard putting this beautiful craft together, say, and then you'd go out and fly it for the first time, and it seemed like a hit and miss whether or not, you'd get this smooth video when you're cruising along. And sometimes you just lucked out. You bought the right components, put it together in such a way, and it was hard to understand exactly why and where and when that arose. So I knew that I had to get a handle on that. I had to figure out when it happens, how I could measure it first. I mean, it was really important to know how to measure it, what exactly we were even looking for. And I know a lot of people, a lot of devs they already understood this, but it wasn't something that was well known in the community, that's for sure. People would talk about, vibration at 200 or 300 hertz and then link that to like vibration that they see in their video. And something was not sitting right with me with that idea, because clearly, you know, we're recording at like 30 or 60 hertz on these cameras. So they're only sampling every 30 hertz. So how is it possible that it can even see vibration at 200 or 300 hertz?
Yeah.
So really, you know, the vibration, I came to realize that really the vibration that we're seeing, the stuff that drives us nuts when we're flying, the jittering and whatever, this is happening at really low frequencies. And so that was, you know, make a long story short, that was kind of what I was emphasizing in PIDtoolbox with like the PID Air tool and the focusing on sub 100 hertz. So yeah, I hope that makes some sense. I could have gone on forever
definitely
on that, but yeah, if you did have MATLAB, you can actually run it right from the command window in MATLAB. Of course, you can also just download the standalone program from the GitHub repository.
With one beginner question before we really jump into the stuff. What do I need? I just need a black box log from my copter. Any specific requirements? I don't know, logging frequency or something that I would need to set correct so it works best?
That's actually a really good question, because a lot of people go into this and they just go out and fly and then look at the log file, and that's fine enough, but there is a better way to go about it. There's two things mainly that you're going to want to do. First, you're going to want to be able to look at the noise profile of your rig, and the best way to do that is to make sure that you're not adding any stick input while you're doing it, because basically what you're trying to do is you want to know how the thing is vibrating across the whole throttle band. So what I typically do is, either in a separate log file or in the same log file, I would start a flight by simply, you know, taking off and getting a steady straight cruise. You need a fairly wide open area, and just do completely slow increase in throttle until you reach full throttle, and then slowly back off. Turn around, do the same thing. And what you're doing then is you're allowing the gyro to just basically collect, you're just collecting gyro information across the entire throttle band as the motors start to rev up. So any really bad mid-throttle points or anything like that, they're going to show up at a different point in that throttle curve. But the nice part about that is when you look at the analysis, especially the sub 100 hertz gyro data, you don't want stick input, because the stick input is in and of itself low frequency information, and you'll end up filling up the sub 20-30 hertz with your copter movement, and you won't know what's copter movement versus what's undesirable sort of vibration, right? Because sometimes these vibrations are actually happening even below 30 hertz. They could be down as low as 20 hertz or 10 hertz. Sometimes you get some kind of wobble. You know, we use these terms really loosely these days. So when I think of wobble, I think of something that's happening, you know, below, say, 10 hertz. But if you're giving stick input, then that's going to create low frequency information. Let me give you a little example anyway as I go to...
Also, just because I'm curious, in black box, in Betaflight, do I need to set something specific?
Right, yeah.
With logging frequency or something? Is this important?
So it's not critical, but if you were going to set something, you'd want to set the debug mode, and you'd set the debug mode to what's called gyro_scaled. Now you can look up these debug modes. I think Betaflight, you can probably just Google Betaflight debug modes, and I think Mark Spatz or somebody has made a little summary of the main ones you'd be interested in. But basically, if you're into coding at all or program, debug is just another way of sort of peering into the output of the system in some way, or into the variables and the data. So gyro scaled is just the gyro data before it's filtered. So this pre-filtered gyro. So you can see all this gray area here. This is the before filtering, and then the dark black is after filtering.
So the gyro pre-filtered is what the gyro actually measures.
It's what
The gyro is what is after the filtering visible for the gyro.
So if I wanted to zoom in on that little bit, for example, there we can just kind of grab that. And you
is it then also important, or would I do that on a default quad, not changing anything, just go as it is and follow the steps you just told me?
Probably.
So I wouldn't do any changes up front.
You mean with the PIDs and stuff, flying
with
defaults?
PIDs and filtering and stuff like that? Yeah.
Well, the developers would more than likely say they made defaults for a reason, but I know what I like, so I usually know a few things that I kind of change. Yeah,
they have to apply
I think
default settings that work on every quad, and you are now specific to maybe just the ones you like, and you know which steps you can apply without endangering any fire.
It's only because I know from the get-go that I can do that on certain quads, and usually you can figure that out in your basement even. So if I set that and I get a flyaway, then I'll get a little dent in my ceiling up here.
Wouldn't be the first one, yeah.
No, it doesn't happen very frequently, but
I'd suggest for the beginning the default settings are fine, and then you know if your quad is able to cope with weaker filtering. If you start with too weak filters from the very beginning, you may burn your motors. And
you can get a flyaway from
now
both
you scare
ends.
me.
Yeah, you can get a flyaway from both ends of the spectrum. And I'll show you what I mean. This is a great example right here. Believe it or not, this copter has a ton of filtering. So this was a little test just to show the difference between low and high filtering. And you can see this is throttle. So as I'm increasing the throttle here, and that's full, then I drop it off again. And you see the gyro start to, well, there's a mid-throttle thing going on here. And then as it gets up higher and higher, then all of a sudden it starts to go nuts. You see that? I want to link this back to what we said earlier about the two types of flying that you want to do to assess either noise on the one hand or for tuning purposes like step response. So you can see here that we had this gradual increase in throttle. So at least one, I would call this a throttle sweep or a slow throttle sweep. So at least one of these you'd want, maybe two in a recording would be good. And then what you'd do is you'd look into your log file and just select out, again using the gray windows here, select out the portion that you want to analyze. And so then we can go into the spectral analyzer. And there's all kinds of options here. I would probably, so this is just if you had two log files, A plus B. A is just log file A and B is log file B. So, and there's a few different presets. So normally I just usually go for this one. And then we run that. Okay, so what you're looking at here now, this is your roll, pitch, and yaw. It's along this way, and this is before filtering, and then after filtering of the gyro alone. This is P term, and then you have D term over here. If you didn't select the proper debug mode, you wouldn't get this.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a situation where you see a band of noise here and you got rid of it, or maybe you don't get rid of it, and you know it's just nice to be able to make the comparison of how well your filters are working, right?
So this one slope, this yellow line, is the motor RPM dependent noise.
This is the motor dependent noise, exactly. And so
and it should be missing in the next one, in the filter one. Then your RPM filtering is doing well. Is this
exactly? That's their RPM filtering taking that out, right? So what I often do too is kind of zoom in here on this band, this little band.
Why, Abraham? Why is the below 100 hertz so important? Can you explain a few sentences?
Well, it's basically the movement of your copter that you see in the goggles. The camera's only seeing, let's say, vibration within a certain range. It's certainly you certainly can't expect a 30 hertz camera to see vibration that's much higher than 100 hertz, right? So I guess my point is your entire experience as an FPVer is tied to vibration that's happening down here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, obviously.
Why is there a dotted yellow line at 20 hertz?
So I default this dotted line at 20 hertz, assuming, I mean, it, under a general sort of assumption that this activity is the desired copter motion.
That's what we want. That's what we actually want to measure.
Generally,
Everything
that's what you want. But in fact, because I wasn't providing any input here, so I wasn't actually moving the sticks. So a lot of this activity is actually the undesired copter vibration. Let me give a couple of examples. Usually, prop wash oscillation is happening around 30 to 50 hertz. So you'll usually see some kind of a blob around here for that. And that's an indicator of prop wash. Now the problem is you might go, well, I don't know if this is prop wash or if this is mid-throttle oscillation. How can I tell the difference? That's why we do the test where there's no stick input. And then we would do a separate test where we might do stick input to test things like prop wash. We can have these as distinct flights, and then we can select it out in the log file.
What do we want to see? Can you go back to the spectral analyzer graph?
Okay, that's a good question. So a lot of people get obsessed with the idea that I don't want any noise here. So first of all, you definitely don't want these sort of strong bands, like resonance bands. Usually that'll be taken care of with a dynamic notch. Nowadays we have RPM filtering that's basically chasing this, and the dynamic notch is generally set to track what's happening here in this range. So once you start to get up here, the RPM filters are attacking this vibration, but there's nothing down here. And so this is where the dynamic notch would be staying around looking for any kind of resonance from the frame. So usually that's all taken care of. See, so often I find what people do is they get too concerned about how clean this should be, and at the expense of what's happening down here. So one of the problems is that, if you wanted to get rid of this, you could start to add another low pass filter, maybe setting at 120 hertz or so. What you're going to do is you're going to keep making the copter actually fly worse. And so for me, I'm always trying to get that gyro latency down, especially. And just from my own experience, I've always found that a lower gyro latency tends to give you better results than worrying so much about the D-term latency. Now, I don't know exactly why that is. That's just something that I've observed through experience. I would always recommend take your gyro filter and try to bring it all the way to the right, but leave the D-term filter at the center or even lower. So I usually go with a little more filtering at that end. So I guess
what delay is acceptable? What's a good delay?
That's a good question. My stuff usually is somewhere around 0.5 to a millisecond in the gyro delay.
Yeah, so what we see here in this file is quite a lot.
Yeah,
this is a lot.
I mean, it's not a lot. I don't want to get people freaked out, because if I post this and someone goes, 2.5, what are you talking about? It's a lot. And well, it's not a lot, but like there's a big difference in flight performance though when you go down a couple of milliseconds, and it's crazy. I would never believe that to be true. 2 milliseconds doesn't seem like very much. It almost seems like a ridiculous argument to make, but it certainly makes a difference when it comes to prop wash handling and stuff like that. So definitely you want to try to get this as low as you can. And the two things to keep in mind is that your low pass filters are what eats up are what generate a lot of delay, whereas notch filters and the dynamic notch really don't do anything. They hardly add any delay at all, and they really target the locality of the noise. And the fact that our quadcopters tend to really be very local noise, right? It's not a broadband noise that we get from quadcopters. They tend to have this, or you get this motor band, and sometimes you get a resonance frequency. But other than that, it's really just a kind of, sometimes a haze of little bits of noise throughout there. And this default scaling was set to be such that when this looks black, then you're pretty much okay, even if it was a little bit. But
So the darker the better, and the lower the estimated filter delay, the better.
Yeah, and the thing is, they'll fight against one another, though, right? Because the lower the filter delay means it's not going to be darker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're letting more noise through. But you know, it's a choice that you have to sort of make yourself. It's a trade-off that you have to decide on yourself. But it's worth exploring a long way. So, like, I think a lot of people don't realize. So you can see here, I just changed the scale and how much that changes. But
what to decide on? When you say we have to decide, people have to decide for themselves what the optimum is between latency and filtering strength. How should the graph look like? Where's the optimum? I know that's a philosophical question.
It's not really, though. No, what I would say is I would aim for less than 2 milliseconds here. Now, this calculation, you can see it's always like, why is it? It's uncanny that it rounds off at 5.5 milliseconds. You might ask, why is that? And the reason for that is because this estimation is based on it's got a resolution of a half millisecond. And that half a millisecond resolution comes as a result of the sampling frequency. So because I'm logging at 2 kilohertz, then I have a half a millisecond resolution.
Is there another possibility to reduce the filter delay except from reducing filtering strength? So maybe the filtering is already at the minimum, and if it's lower, you get PTM oscillations. Is there a way to reduce the filter delay? Maybe a faster CPU or NPU?
No. I mean, you can get some what's called loop time jitter if you have a lot of processes going on. I'm not sure where that comes from, and I'm not an expert in that area. But in terms of the speed of the processor itself, it has nothing to do with this delay. But because we're filtering in real time, you have it generates this lag, and the stronger the filter, so the lower the cutoff, it tends to lag more and more. So you can actually see the delay. So you see that 2.5 milliseconds. If you zoom in here, so this is yours. So mine's at 3.5. This is your log here. So if I zoom in on this, so yeah, you can actually see it. So if I just get rid of this guy, you see this is your pre-filtered is the light gray. And then there's your filtered signal is the black. And if you were to guesstimate, like the line should go sort of about here, right? Mm-hmm. So this is probably, if I was going to guess, I would say somewhere along here. Maybe about here. So I can put a data tip there. So you can see it's 55,705 seconds. And then this is the actual point that the filter gyro's at. So you can see it's about 5, 6, 7, 8, 3 milliseconds later. This is milliseconds here, 5 to 8. And so if we go back to that, what is your latency? 2.5, right? So it's about 3 milliseconds, and you can see that in the actual data. So you know, you wouldn't think that delay matters, but when it really matters, because especially the D term is built from that, right? So I don't want to get into that depth, though. That's too complicated. I won't bother that. So I'm losing my train of thought now.
Maybe I can
yeah,
basically
bring it back, reel it in.
No, I think that the direction that Michael was going, and the one I would like to proceed, I have not basic understanding about delays need to be low. I aim for probably as little of the bright spots we can see here. Yeah. What happens if I see that? What I, as a novice in that topic, what shall I do? What are my steps? What's the next thing for me? Just cry and trash my build, or build something new, rip it apart and recreate it? What's the next step?
So you suppose you fly your copter and you produce a plot like this, and you see this wonderful band that moves across this with throttle. Okay, so we're okay with that. That's cool. And we don't see much going on here, like in terms of a sort of a band that just happens right across one frequency. So that's good, because that would indicate that you have a frame problem, right? So we don't have that. Now I'm happy. And everything else below it, as long as this is not too high. And in fact, don't worry about the stuff down here for now, because that will actually change depending on how you set your filters. But if you find this scenario, then you can pat yourself on the back and say, I've got good components and I built me a good quadcopter. So now I can start reducing filter delay by reducing the filters. And your best bang for the buck is to get rid of or reduce the low pass filters. So increase the cutoffs. Personally, I would say, like, if you can, at least turn one off. The noise is only relevant to the extent that it gives you bad vibration in the video, in your HD video or in your goggles, or it burns up your motors, or it changes flight characteristics in some way. So maybe there's 3 reasons. But usually, what does everybody tell you? What have you heard from almost every video in the past 2 years or 3 years? Is check your motors. If it's good, then push the slider further. Check your motors. Check your motors is there just to say that, are they hot? Are they ready to burn out? All right? If you don't have a problem with that, then keep going. And that's true for the gyro, not for the D term. That's a whole different ballgame. The D term, you definitely need the filtering. And I would recommend for D term, I never see a benefit with having a cutoff higher than 150 hertz on D term.
I'm seriously now getting afraid of someone walking into the video feed from behind and just stabbing you.
No. Why do you say that?
It's funny. It's such a silly thing to say, really. But in the FPV world, that's kind of like controversy or something, right?
Okay.
So this is where,
as I said,
from the get-go, this is what we were saying, how should I fly defaults? Yeah, you should fly defaults if you don't really know what you're doing, and just and if you don't care, especially if it doesn't matter to you, then just fly defaults and go fly and enjoy. But if you really want good performance, right from the get-go, what I always do is I set my D-term low-pass filter, and I always use biquad there just because I do it simpler. And I set it at about 120 hertz. And when I'm in the field, I might play around. I might up it to 150 and try it down as low as 60. I'll play around there until I find a sweet spot.
But Brian, on this chart, on this spectral analyzer, we see a blob at around 20% throttle, 200 hertz.
Yeah.
That's what the
right
so
here.
D-term, the very it's
So,
the gyro, but also in the D term.
It's pretty subtle. In general, you'd look at that and you go, it's nothing.
That's
It's
okay.
really,
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I would say in terms of the gyro. In D term, some people get a little panicky about this, but I've seen D term look a lot noisier than this. But this is actually nothing. Usually D term is a lot worse than that. In D term, you'd expect that. In the grand scheme, I mean, look what you've already brought down. You've killed all that, and you have it here. And now what you're saying is this is what's showing up in that little blob. So I guess my point is, is that this is, I would say it's pretty insignificant. Yeah. We're getting wiped out now. This is called, it's where your brain gets saturated with information. I was going to show you something else that's kind of cool. But,
okay.
So now this is a throttle sweep. So now you can really see what a throttle sweep. So over here you're looking at percent throttle. So you're going to see that I'm slowly increasing the throttle here. And this is going to show you the peak energy between 30 and 80 hertz.
Konstruktive Interferenz in German. Do you know what's in English, Christian?
Probably it's constructive interference.
So you see when it reaches here, watch the peak go up. Look at that. Boom.
Okay.
Look at that.
40 hertz. Okay.
See, around 40 hertz, and it just goes nuts, right? So
it's not prop wash because it's the same range, same frequency range.
It's not just it's not prop wash because I'm also just doing a throttle sweep. So you don't get prop wash unless you sort of fall down into turbulent air, right?
Yep.
So this is the exact same machine, and now all I've done is I turned off the low pass filters. Remember I was telling you about reducing the filtering? And you see now, what do you notice now? You notice that there's more noise. You see how there's more noise overall?
Yes.
But just look down here now. as I increase throttle. So you're getting a little more sparse noise up here, but is it really doing anything bad? Probably not. But you can see down here now in the really low frequencies, things look a lot better, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of noise up here, but that's higher up here, right? A little bit down, right?
Yeah.
Right? And all I did was basically just, this is less filtering than before.
Less,
right? Okay. Less filtering. This is removing low pass filters. Less, right? That's what's kind of surprising to people. There's certainly,
but never mind.
Yeah, there's certainly an inverse relationship. There's certainly some kind of an inverse relationship between the amount of filtering you have and the amount of vibration you get down here. You know, I've always kind of found that intriguing.
Guys, it's 10 p.m.
Same for me.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this.